Did you know that if you sew a design on some stable fabric, then slide a piece of Velcro under the hoop, sew a satin stitch border to attach the two together, then use this, a cutting needle, you can cut the design and the Velcro out at the same time, then clean up the edges with a heat gun, and you've created a Velcro-backed patch using just your embroidery machine. I'm Chris from Embroidery Systems, and I'm going to walk you through the process using Melco software and Melco machines. Let's start with setting up the design in Design Shop. Here's some lettering that I'm going to turn into a patch. I'll need to create a satin stitch border, which I can do with the single line column tool, but in this case, I'm going to use one of the pre-digitized shapes. I'll choose this oval, and I just have to drag it up into the workspace and center it around my design. I'll increase the width of these stitches. I like at least a 4mm width for a patch. Now I need to create a path for the cutting needle to follow. For this, we use a walk bean stitch. The default stitch length for a walk stitch is 2mm, but we're not making stitches with the cutting needle, we're poking holes. It's kind of like a tiny knife. So I'm going to change the stitch length to 3 points or 0.3mm. I'm also going to change the bean thickness to 5. Sometimes 3 is fine, but in some cases the extra penetrations might help to cut more cleanly. I could manually digitize the bean stitch, just clicking barely outside the satin stitches. But with Design Shop 12, there's a feature that will put a uniform border around anything. I just select my satin stitch, then click on Generate Border. Depending on the patch and the material, I find that an offset of between 5 and 10 points is good. We don't want them so close that it's going to cut our stitches, but we want to minimize how much material is left outside of our patch. So I'll set it to about 8. You might have to trial and error this a little bit. Same goes with these features here. You may have to see which one gives you the cleanest outline. Once that's created, I confirm the stitch length and the bean thickness. When I zoom in here, you can see if I turn on expanded editing, those are all the puncture points for the cutting needle. So that should perforate the material well enough to cut the patch free. Finally, I confirm that the satin stitch border and the cutting needle bean stitch sew last and are both on their own unique color changes, since we'll need the machine to pause before the border sews, and the cutting needle will sew on its own needle position. I prefer to make my cut line a unique color as well, so that it stands out visually. Now before I load it to the machine, I want to disable something called the stitch filter. Because our cut line, the bean stitch, uses a stitch length that would not work with regular needle and thread, the software will try to filter those stitches out if I don't disable this feature. Now I can go ahead and load the design and set up the color sequence. After sewing the body of the patch, I need the machine to stop so I can slide the Velcro under before sewing the satin stitch border. So before those two colors, I will put in a hold command. As for the cutting needle, because there's no thread involved, the machine's going to constantly stop for thread breaks, so we need to disable that. And there's a couple of ways to do this. I can right-click on the position that I plan to put my cutting needle in this case needle 16, but instead of assigning a thread color, there's an option here to choose bore needle. Bore needles are typically meant to punch holes in fabric to make lace and things like that. But what we're doing is basically the same thing. So if we turn this option on, the software should get the machine to turn off the thread feeder and the thread detection for that needle position. Another way to do this is to go into settings by color, enable that, select the color associated with the cutting needle, in this case needle number 3, and uncheck all thread detection. Now I'm going to replace the sewing needle with the cutting needle. There's no preferred orientation, just put it in any direction. Then I'll cut a piece of hook Velcro from this roll. It was donated to us by a client. Just try to find some Velcro that's nice and thin, like this, that you can sew through, that's not going to break your threads or break your needles. Now to hoop the material. I'm using a twill here with black backing. I'm using black backing and also black bobbin so that it matches the black of the Velcro when it's attached. Put the hoop on the machine and we'll sew out the design. Once it's on hold, we'll slide the Velcro under, sew the border. And now the cutting needle will cut around the outside edge. When it's done, we should be able to just tear the patch right out of the hoop. It'll have some frayed edges, so we'll clean those up using a heat gun. This one that I'm using is one that we sell here called the Kronus Jet, and it has a nice narrow focus and it works really well for this kind of job. Just be careful not to burn your hand. And there you have it, a Velcro-backed patch. If you want to learn more, check out the links in the description. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.